Kyle Idleman is the pastor and author, and in his new book, One at a Time, he breaks down how you can change the world and have a meaningful impact while living the Christian life. Kyle, welcome to Hope Today.
Hey, it's great to be with all of you.
Kyle, where did the heart for this book come from?
You know, as a pastor, I find myself often surrounded by one-at-a-time stories. So I get to hear how God has influenced, transformed, changed somebody's life. And he always seems to do that through some sort of one-at-a-time moment where he uses somebody at the right time in the right way to impact someone else. And so having a front row seat to that for so long just gave me this conviction of this is how we want to change the world. And then as I read through the Gospels, I realized that so much of the real estate in the Gospels is really committed to Jesus doing just that, one-at-a-time stories. And oftentimes they would take place within a crowd. In other words, he's surrounded by this large group of people, but he sees the one, he takes time for the one, he has compassion on the one, and the Gospels are full of those stories. The passage that you guys just talked about from John 13, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. What strikes me about that passage is that Jesus is saying that to disciples who have clean feet. Like early in that chapter is where we read about him washing the feet of the disciples. And what makes that commandment new is that, right? Like it's the way that Jesus as the Son of God would serve and love others. And so, you know, finding ways that may not seem significant to us in the moment, like we're wanting a big deal or a grand gesture, but washing feet is the new way of loving. That's the way that we can do it one at a time, and everybody can do that.
You compare the crowds that were around Jesus to crowds like at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And I've been there at the parade. My favorite float is Snoopy when he comes by. But I'm just picturing Jesus in that moment with people all around. Can you describe what Jesus does, how he acts, what he's looking for, and how he's moving?
You know, the language I like to use is zoom lens language, that if you're taking a picture of someone in a large crowd, you pull that up on your screen, you zoom in till you find the person you're looking for, then you focus and take your picture. And Jesus had a way of living life that way, where there would be people all around him with different needs, expectations of what they think he should be doing or specifically what he should do for them. But Jesus would zoom in on one. And a great example of that is actually in John 8, when Jesus is with this large crowd. We read that this woman with an issue of blood reached out, touched his cloak. She tried to disappear into the crowd. Jesus says, "Who touched me? I felt power go out from me." The disciples are all like, "Hey, there are people everywhere. What are you talking about?" And then there's a super beautiful verse. It says in John 8 that the woman, Luke 8, I'm sorry, the woman realized that she could not go unnoticed. She realized that she could not go unnoticed. I love that in the midst of all of these people, she recognized Jesus wasn't going to let her go unnoticed. And then Jesus says to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." And when he says daughter, in that culture, it's unusual enough for a Jewish rabbi to speak directly to a woman, right? But when he does that, he doesn't just speak to her directly, he calls her daughter. And when you hear that, it reveals how he lived one at a time. He sees each person on that type of level, with that kind of relationship where he calls her daughter.
You give such an easy description of how we can do this. You said, see someone and then do something. So can you take us to like a practical everyday life story where we can see someone and then we can act and do something?
Well, what I can tell you is that like today you will have those moments. If you will pray a simple prayer, "God, help me to see the one, help me to see people the way that you see people," he will answer that prayer. You will have an opportunity to do that. 40 times in the Gospels, we read that Jesus saw, and whenever Jesus saw, there's almost always a story that follows. So he sees and then he does something about it. I have discovered for me, sometimes people do that for me, and I don't think they realize how big it was. A moment like that for me was in the 8th grade when a Sunday school teacher named Scott Fields, who was an accountant, held me after class at Sunday school and just took a minute, probably 2 minutes at most, to speak into my life and just say to me, hey, I see this in you. I think God's given you some leadership gifts. And he may have said that to everyone in the class. He probably did. But that moment for me was really significant. And I'm, all these years later, still influenced by those words. And I know that God will give us opportunities today that may not seem huge to us, but he will use it to have an impact in that person's life that we may not fully see or realize.
Yeah, Kyle, I love that you talk about that adult that was in your life that really spoke those life-giving words into you. And I've actually been doing some reading about the influence that teachers and adults can have on kids and how important it is for us to really love them, because some kids, some people come out of very messy situations. They come from homes where there is no love, and they need to experience that love of Christ. And yet, because of their pain, because of their trauma, they are hard to love. How have you encouraged, helped, equipped those in your congregation to love people who are hard to love?
I think Jesus did this so beautifully because he knew each person's story. And one of the challenges I would have for my church, I'd have for your listeners and viewers, would be that you take the time to understand what's happening in someone's life. I didn't do this when I was a young pastor, and there was this kid named Alan. Alan was like 8 years old, and he was horrible. He'd come to church by himself and just cause all kinds of problems. And I was so done with Alan. And one day after church, my wife and I took him back to his house, and we're going to tell his parents, look, you can't just send him anymore. If you want him to come to church, you got to come with him. And we knocked on the door. His mom was angry and said, what did that blankety blank kid do now? And grabbed him and jerked him inside, and suddenly everything changed in my heart. I was frustrated with Alan. I didn't want him there because he caused so many problems and challenges. But the minute I got a chance to understand better what was happening in his life, my heart towards him changed. And so this would be, I think, the challenge for us. Jesus, let me care enough about someone to understand what's going on in their lives. Because if I can stop and think, what would it be like to be them, it softens my heart. It helps me love them one at a time.